ago and asked if I would do kind of a pinch hit talk today, since Elizabeth couldn't be here. Give a little talk regarding Verona Post Office. So, a lot of you know me, maybe a few don't, but I actually retired from the Postal Service 11 years ago, and I was the manager at the Verona Post Office the last 10 years. I also started at the Verona Post Office as a summer. It was supposed to be a 3-month summer job. They had an announcement during announcement time at the high school in the spring saying they had an opening for a summer employee. And I thought, oh, sounded like a good way to earn a few dollars for going to college at the UW. And so I went down to see Boyd Gens, the postmaster, and I think I was the only applicant, although I had to go and take an exam. It was a student assistant program. I have no idea why I had to take an exam, but at any rate, I got the job. And I believe my trainer, the first day, is in the room, and the other trainer is also in the room. Dick Bogdano. I was wearing this goofy orange shirt. I have no idea why. I remember wearing an orange shirt, and Bucky showed me the ropes on his route, and then Art trained me on the other route to tell you, to give a little perspective on how big the post office was. There were 4 routes here, and there were 2 city routes, and in fact, I think that Bucky's wasn't even quite a full route at that time. It wasn't even an 8-hour route. So, kind of a one-horse town. There were no postal vehicles. We had a leased Rambler, a lime-colored Rambler. That, what's that?
That belonged to a guy in Mazel.
Yep, Foley, I think, or something like that. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But anyway, they were both walking routes, all walked the entire routes, and then we used that vehicle to go and deposit the mail at what we call relay boxes. You still see those in downtown Madison, those green boxes. And so Bucky would deliver those before he started his route and deliver the parcel post. And then as Art and later Bucky then would go out on the route, and you pick up the mail for the next segment out of those boxes. But then later the big time hit, and we ended up with a postal Jeep, and then gradually things advanced from there. But I do remember the green Rambler very well. At any rate, yeah, so I started in 1967, and then I think it was like in November I stopped in one day, and then Boyd Gens said that they had some part-time work. And the reason I got the job there is that Harlan Dalk, not Harlan, but Harlan F. Dalk, the town chairman, Harlan Dalk, actually was a sub, and Art can testify to that. But he kind of wanted to phase out. I think he was hired when Safe Delivery started as a sub. He wanted to phase out, so I kind of got Harlan Dalk's job, actually. And then I worked when I was going to college, and then ended up in the main post office in management. I had a few positions, rural delivery for southern Wisconsin. I was involved with management of the rural delivery system, and then I was at the main office retail unit in the main office on Milwaukee Street. Initially, actually, I was there's another Verona connection there. After I left Verona, I became a financial auditor. And Frank Brott, a few of you maybe remember Frank Brott, he actually, his job was eliminated at the Verona Post Office. And there was a new program for financial examiners to go out and do surprise financial audits throughout the post offices in southern Wisconsin. He got one of those positions. He stayed around for a while, but then decided that he had had enough and decided to retire. So, and then I actually got Frank's job at the Madison Post Office. So two Verona guys actually, who, and I'll tell you a little bit about the history of why Verona is a branch of the Madison Post Office and not a separate post office with a postmaster. So at any rate, then I ended up the last 10 years as the manager of the Verona Post Office. So I know a little bit about the history. Some of it is totally plagiarized from history books and so forth, but and I've asked Art and then Bucky, chime in on anything you may recall at any time. And John Scher certainly has earlier memories of some of the people, or anyone else who has any recollections that I may be forgetting or be incorrect on, just chime in. So part of the time I'm going to have to take off my glasses here. I'm sorry, I have a few vision issues here, and so you'll have to pardon my on and off. So in 1972, some of you remember the Cosqui Centennial. And I was still working part-time for the Verona Press for Henry Schrader. Rick Featherston and I started in 1965 when we were juniors, I guess, sophomores maybe, writing high school news right after the Verona Press was started. It's 50 years ago, by the way, this year the Verona Press was established. And Henry Schrader had taken on the task of updating history, produce a history book. And somehow I said I would help, but kind of ended up holding the bag on this, on this thing and kind of got stuck with the whole job. So we're doing a remodel job at our house. We have a whole bunch of stuff packed away. So I had to go to the library actually to get a copy. There are a couple copies at the library. Fortunately, they haven't been lost, of the Verona history, 1847 to 1972. And I basically took Alice Kunstman's 1947 Centennial book and a couple of history of Dane County books, and I used a lot of that material and just updated it, and then added some of my own research. So some of the really old history of the post office really came from Alice Kunstman's book, and some of the resources that you can find in history of Dane County. There are two or three sources. But at any rate, I counted up that there were, according to the history accounts, at least 13 different places where there were post offices over the years, if you can believe it. And the first mention of any postal service was via horse, with stops at the Thomas Stewart residence in the Sugar River Valley, west of the village. There was later a post office at the Badger Mills. There was a post office at, and this dates everything, I said here that at the present home of Mr. and Mrs. Lester Thompson at the intersection of 9 Mound Road and 18151. And at any rate, that's where the hotel is being constructed. What is it, Fairfield Inn or whatever is being built. There was a post office there. It said that the name of the first postmaster was Joseph Flick, and he had the post office in a building where the Dr. Sharp house was located, where, well, Ace and Park Bank are located. And then down through history, it said that there was a post office in the, well, at this point it was the Roethlisberger home. It's the home on the northeast corner of Verona Avenue, North Main Street. And then there was a post office where, again, this dates when this was written. It says where the Verona Pharmacy is located. Well, the pharmacy that burned down, and that, of course, is kind of approximately in the parking lot of Walgreens along Verona Avenue. And then it was located at the site of, in the Miller and Sons supermarket location, I assume at their original location at the corner of Park Lane and South Main. Said that Stanley Gordon, some of you will remember Stanley Gordon, was postmaster from 1915 to 1922, and he had post office quarters in the building now occupied by Blizzard's Western Auto. Well, that's the Avanti building. And then it moved, and I personally remember this. It was in the where the Schmidt Law Office is now. It was Fischel's Bar and Bowling Alley. It was on the right side, I believe, where later Dale's, well, it was Hagen's and then Dale's Barbershop. At the time this was written, it was Dale's Barbershop. I think my mother had me run in and get the mail one day. I happen to remember going in there, so I must have been no more than 5 years old, but I remember like state journals sticking out of the mail cases there. Then it moved to what was the McKee Insurance Building, a lovely metal building at, I believe it was 106 West Verona Avenue, am I right? So we never forget the addresses. And that, again, is kind of in the Walgreens parking lot. And then it moved in 1958 to 100 South Schumann Street. What's the chiropractic clinic there? Corner of South Schumann and West Verona Avenue. No, across from Ace. Lutke, is that what's there now?
Right by the veterinary's office there.
Right, by Verona Veterinary Clinic. You know where I'm talking about? You can here is, in fact, I ran across a picture. This is what it looked like. It doesn't look much different than it does now, actually, but that's when it was brand spanking new. At the corner of South Schumann and West Verona Avenue. So that was where it was located starting in 1958. And then the plaque in the current post office says it was dedicated in 1991. So that's the current location, of course, on Enterprise Drive. So it's been in a lot of places.
Why did they move so much?
I have no idea.
Ken, the only place that I didn't hear you
Oh,
say.
the bank building.
The bank.
I skipped, as soon as you said it, I missed that. Yes, I glossed over that. Where did I miss that?
When the bank was right there in the
Yep,
corner of.
yep.
Huh?
Here. Where is it? It's in here. You're absolutely right. Oh yeah, after the blizzards, here it is. It was located in the old Bank of Verona building until 1948 under 4 postmasters. It was on, and correct me if I'm wrong, when I was a kid it was the library. Is that where the post office was? On the old bank building at the corner, the side facing West Verona Avenue. There were some steps going up there. It was the library. Right, yep. Everything kind of centers around the Walgreens parking lot. How about that? So, yeah, thank you for that, because I skipped over it. That is absolutely correct.
And the telephone office at that time was upstairs.
Yep.
Above that.
Correct, Mount Vernon Telephone Company. My mother took me up there one time to see the operators, and it's one of those little life lessons you remember. I remember. Now here's a picture that I copied out of this Verona history book, and this would be Bill Matz's parents. And as far as I know, I think it matches up with the history. As far as I know, I think this is the post office in the old bank building, I believe. So some of you have seen this. This is actually his mother and dad. It's kind of a Matz dynasty with the post office here, is all can explain. So
Ken, didn't, in those days, didn't the postmaster basically change when there was a
Yes.
change in government?
That is correct. Yep, that was one of my
The
points.
president became,
Correct.
was a Democrat?
Yes.
The president was a Republican?
Absolutely.
Postmaster.
Postmasters were political appointments. And one step beyond that, rural carriers were political appointments. Even when Ken Zing started, I think like 1960 at the Verona Post Office, he was a city carrier in Madison. He was a political appointee as late as 1960. And I don't know when the postmasters, let's see, when we were working there in the 60s, it was still the U.S. Post Office Department. Well, the Postmaster General was a cabinet member of the President's cabinet. It was a political department. And then was it 70, 71? Under Nixon, the current U.S. Postal Service was created. And so it took some of the political operation out of the Postal Service. I'm deviating a little bit here, but the President appoints a board of governors, kind of like a corporate board of directors, and they appoint the Postmaster General the CEO, as opposed to being a cabinet member of the President's cabinet. So that transition happened right about that time, and in fact that was, again, I'm kind of deviating here just a little bit, but there was kind of an upheaval at that time. There actually were some wildcat strikes throughout the country, and I do remember this, that the Madison Post Office, the clerks had gone out on strike, and we hardly had any mail coming into the post office.
Joe Gannon was ticketing.
Was he? Oh, was he? Okay, I didn't remember that. I did not remember that. But anyway, I belonged to the Letter Carriers Union, and I do remember either Art or Ken Zing saying, geez, I guess, I don't know, maybe we have got to get together and decide what we're going to do, or are we going to strike, or what are we going to do? Well, they settled then. But I think that kind of that striking activity and upheaval kind of helped lead the way to the reorganization of the Postal Service into its present form. I do remember that, either you or Ken saying, I think you did. Sort of get to, we had our own local.
We had our own local here.
Yeah, we had a separate letter carriers union local in Verona, but we didn't go out on strike. I can say for the record, we did not go out on strike. So anyway, let's see if I can get back on track here a little bit. But as I think of these things, I'll just mention them. So at any rate, the first rural mail delivery was November 1900. That's about when rural delivery was being established in the country. Up until that time, there was no rural delivery. I think city delivery, if I remember right, just nationally started in the Civil War era. But I think the first rural route was in West Virginia, if I remember correctly. Sun Prairie, I think, had the first one in Wisconsin. 1898, it seems to me, I recall reading that. So the first route was 1900, and then there were two more routes established in 1902. So for some time, Verona actually had 3 rural routes way back. As I know in the, I don't know, some of you may have one of these, the old Prairie Farmer Farm Directory, I think like 1928 or something like that. I don't know. Dick, do you have one of those books? At any rate, it tells every farm family, you know, the family members and everything. And it says our farm up on Cross Country Road was Rural Route 3. And but that route, then they consolidated to 2 routes in 1933. So that remained for quite some time. There were 2 rural routes. And the rural carriers, when I started, were Ken Zing and Bill Matz. And I'll kind of describe the area that the Verona Post Office covers. Some people don't realize what pretty big area that it covers. And just, you know, is mostly just farms, so these two routes covered quite a huge area. So the 53593 zip code, of course Madison comes kind of close, but actually it goes over on Lacey Road to Seminole Highway. There were some boundary straightening out adjustments when I was still at the post office here, and I don't remember if we had any remaining deliveries on Seminole Highway or not, but over where the O'Briens are and so forth, the Vromans, some of that was Madison, some was Verona, and I think maybe they changed it all to Madison. But at any rate, Lacey Road, Wayland Road, Sunset Drive, Purcell Road starts Belleville. And then it goes into the northern side of Peoli, goes down to south of Mount Vernon, kind of cutting across here. Goes all the way down to some of Highway A, south of Mount Vernon is Verona. Highway, part of Highway 92. A lot of people probably don't know that. And then it goes all the way to Prairie Ridge Road, almost to Mount Horeb actually. Very close to Mount Horeb. And then Timber Lane goes all the way up to Old Sauk Road. In Timber Lane, Old Sauk Road. And then Mineral Point Road west of Highway M is Verona.
Actually, still goes north of Middle Point Road.
Oh yeah, right. Oh yes, all the way up to Old Sauk. So when you drive up to Highway M and then go west of Mineral Point Road, Cherrywood, some of you I'm sure know where Cherrywood subdivision is, that's all Verona. And all of that high rent district, Pheasant Point and all of those homes, Cherrywood Hills I think, I can't remember the names of some of those subdivisions. Those are all Verona addresses. So, but in the old days, it was all farm territory. So Ken Zing on Route 1 went all the way from Sunset Drive, basically, to Old Sauk Road, Route 1. And then Route 2 covered kind of like Highway 69 west to all the way south of Mount Vernon, all the way up almost to Mount Horeb, and then up to the Riley area. There was a Riley post office up until, I don't have that, I think in the 1940s. There was actually a Riley rural route, and I don't know if all of that was absorbed into Verona, I think it probably was. But there actually was a Route 1 Riley, Wisconsin mailing address. So those guys drove a lot of miles, didn't have a lot of deliveries. Well, then,
she was one of your rural carriers.
Well, she was Ken Zing's sub.
Bertha
Henderson, right. Bertha Henderson and Doris Lingard Waldman were the subs. Actually, Jay Henderson, I think, was a sub. Well, he might have even worked as a rural carrier at the Riley post office.
Steve Becken did it a couple times too.
That is true. That is a historical footnote there. Yeah, we know. But at any rate, so we had two rural routes. Oh, go ahead.
The two guys that were rural mail carriers before the two you mentioned were Stanley Gordon
Yep.
and Bill Williams.
Bill Williams, yes. Bill Williams was our carrier.
William Williams.
Yes. Actually, it was, what was it, Alton R. Williams, I think it was.
Yeah.
But at any rate, he was, I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, he was our carrier on Route 1. And the next delivery up after us was Guthrie's, the house that Don Withridge owns across from the middle school. A lot of times we got Guthrie's mail. There were some stories about, I think Bill Williams, the Speedway Tavern was on Bill Williams' route, and I think that might have been a stopper to it. I'm not, that's what the legend is. I think maybe so. I think Stanley Gordon, I'll tell you the story of him was that his first stop was Fischel's on the way out of town. I don't know if that was true, but a lot of things happened in those days. And then he had Route 2. Stanley Gordon was think I mentioned, he was also the postmaster one time. I think he was a Democrat, if I remember. He was a Democratic appointee. And then later, he became a rural carrier.
Oh, I was just gonna mention that Vasco and Peoria actually had post offices too.
Yep, they did. Yes, all these little places had.
You're talking about Bill Williams and Speedway Bar.
Yes.
Father telling me one time that he crashed his vehicle, totaled it, father had to tow it into the garage, gave Bill a ride with him, and Bill was not upset about the car, he was so upset because he ripped a fingernail off.
Oh. So there may
I don't
be.
know what state he was in at the time.
Yeah, so I think there may be some truth to what I was saying, but I had heard about Stanley Gordon stopping officials on the way out of town.
Bill Williams' story was that Bill had a birthday. So if someone says, "Happy birthday, Bill," Bill, just another day of human suffering.
Human suffering.
That was his attitude.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for mentioning Bill Williams. He was a legendary guy.
We were talking about
She got new price the last
political
time.
appointments and so
Yes.
forth. Boyd was, had to go into the service during World War II. Emily actually was
Yep.
a postmaster while he was gone.
Yep, then that is in the history, yep, it's mentioned in the history book, yes. Kind of crazy.
See, she drew the double after she was.
Well, 1964, on October 24th, 1964, city delivery was established in Verona. So the house-to-house delivery, to mailboxes on the house. At some point along the line, I used to know this when I was in Madison post offices, something like 1975-ish, 77, nationally, I think that's about right, they cut off house delivery. Said, okay, that's it. The blocks that have house delivery, that's fine, but beyond that, then mailboxes need to be out at the curb. So that's why you'll see, even in Madison, the older portions have delivery to the house, very inefficient, very expensive. So far, at least, they haven't forced people to, although I've read about congressional proposals to actually force people to go to some type of, centralized delivery at the end of the curb, or at the end of the block, or whatever. I don't know that probably will never happen, given the uproar that it would create. But at any rate, 1964, city delivery started in Verona, and here it says James Gerber and Arthur R. Cresson and substitute Harlan F. Dulles were the first city carriers. So when Gerber quit, is that when you came?
Yeah, we went to Colorado.
Yep, and then you got his job. Yep.
I got Gerber's job.
You got your, okay, there we go, okay. So, yeah, so Verona had city delivery starting in 1964. So nowadays, a lot of the city of Verona is on rural delivery. City carriers are the ones that wear uniforms. It used to be they were the ones with the postal vehicles. Nowadays, almost all the rural carriers have rural vehicles also. It used to be they were paid a mileage allowance, but then gradually the Postal Service determined that it was more efficient cheaper to provide the government vehicles than to be paying an allowance. Actually, it was mileage, and then on more dense routes, it was based on miles and number of stops. There was a formula for payment of the use of the private vehicles. So you may wonder, so why do we have city delivery with the uniformed carriers? And even in Madison, all of the fringe areas, you go over into Fitchburg, well, those maybe would look more like rural routes, but Verona, for example, Eastview Heights, all of those areas, cross-country heights, they're delivered by rural carriers. So basically the reason for that is the difference in the unions and the method of payment, salary payments. City carriers are paid based on a 40-hour week. The routes are evaluated to, as closely as possible, to 8 hours a day. So then, and as carriers, and Art was in management, you can testify to the fact it can be sometimes difficult to manage that because, well, then some days are heavier and some days are lighter, and then this carrier needs help, and you know, the more efficient carriers, it's great. The less efficient carriers, and you got the issue of their whining for assistance. Well, the rural carriers are paid in a whole different system. They're paid basically on a salary system. It's a kind of a complicated formula, but it's based on periodic mail counts, which can be quite a ordeal. In fact, I went back about 5 or 6 years ago. They used to hire old guys, retired managers and supervisors, to come back as contractors. It was a month long. Worked about 5 hours a day to assist with counting and categorizing all the types of mail. I mean, that's a very simplistic way of stating it, but rural carriers that serve apartment buildings, the number of feet walked is factored in, the number of boxes, the types of mail, express mail, certified mail, very complex formula. But at any rate, it comes out with an evaluation. Say this route is 44 hours a week. That's what the carrier's paid for, 44 hours a week. So it doesn't matter if it's a light day or a heavy day, that's what they're paid. Within certain limits, you have to manage the hours so they didn't exceed so many hours in a year to be in compliance with the Fair Labor Standards Act. They have a special Fair Labor Standards Act provision just for rural carriers. Except at Christmas time, they're eligible for overtime during a certain period. So as you can see, it's a whole lot easier to manage rural routes where, you know, most of the rural carriers, you know, there's no issue. Whatever mail is there, you deliver it, and you're paid on average, it all averages out. So that's kind of the background as to why, you know, it's not in the interest of the Postal Service to, probably the city carrier union wouldn't, like me, wouldn't like to hear this, but I mean, that's kind of why the rural carriers have picked up basically all the new delivery, because it's an evaluated system, salary system. It's a lot easier to manage. Would you agree, Art? So, in case you've ever wondered why that is it. Well, let's see. So anyway, Boyd Gentz was the last person to hold the title of postmaster in Verona. And there were, oh my gosh, there's a list here of postmasters recorded in history. And as John Scherer mentioned, a lot of the reason why you have this long list is because they flip-flopped with a political party. But there's kind of a Matz dynasty. There's a Matz back in the 1850s, the same guy in the 1870s, I think the same guy again, 1870s, 82. And then Joseph Matz, Bill Matz's dad, was 1922 to 1935. Well, Boyd Gentz was Joe Matz's nephew, Bill Matz's cousin. So he was appointed in, it said he was acting 1939 to 1940. Then Stanley Gordon was 1940 to 41. And then, as Art mentioned, Emily Gentz, his wife, was acting for a period when Boyd was on military duty. And then he was postmaster 1941 to 1971. So then, that kind of leads into the story of why Verona is a branch of Madison and not a separate post office. If you go to Mount Horeb, the boss is a postmaster. You go to Belleville, Oregon, they're a postmaster. Well, the postmaster in Middleton and Verona, Ed Murphy, I think is his name, they retired right about the same time. And right at that point is when the Postal Service in its present form was created. And for a while, there was a Madison district office. I mean, Madison was the sectional center management office, so basically southern Wisconsin. But beyond that, there was a district office for a while that extended, I think, northeast Iowa and all the way up into the UP of Michigan, I think. But at any rate, the manager of this district office had this idea that these outlying offices should become branches of Madison. We don't need a postmaster there, we'll have a manager who answers to the postmaster. Well, actually, all the postmasters answer to the postmaster of Madison, but this would be in a different sense, in that the employees would be integrated into the Madison post office. And I remember at the time the thought was that, oh yeah, well that'll happen to all these other offices, Wanakee, when those postmasters retire, they'll become branches. Well, that never happened. That district manager, I think his name was Verona, if I remember right, but John Verona, but he moved on, and then that district, it was the early stages of the Postal Service, and that district was abolished, and then it was assimilated into other districts, and we became under the Milwaukee District Office, the Madison, what is called the Madison Sectional Center. And so that was it. Milton and Verona had branch managers, and that's why that happened. And one result of that was that the employees in the Verona post office were assimilated as Madison employees.
I went from being number 1 on the seniority list
Yeah.
to being number 303.
There we go. Yeah, we were then we were, and that happened on, Boyd Gens retired April 30th, 1971. Then Ken Zing was, well, they called it officer in charge, the temporary postmaster, until February 4, 1972, and then Verona became a branch of Madison. I lost my thought. Well, right, then I started going into Madison, where I hated it. When there wasn't work in Verona, then I went to Madison and work. And one unfortunate sidebar there was that Catherine Zerbach and Matz had worked, I don't know how many years at the post office, but she, at that point, I don't remember how it went with her job, but she was going to have to possibly go to the main post office and work. She just wasn't going to have any part of it, and she quit. Unfortunately, in retrospect, I think she may never have had to leave, and it would have been a very short time. She would have been right back at the Verona post office. That was kind of a shame at the time, but she ended up quitting. So
You mentioned Catherine, and Lucky can attest to this. When we first started city delivery, everybody had box numbers on their addresses. They didn't have their street address.
oh yeah,
And Catherine
P.O.
was
boxes.
the one that
Right.
she knew everybody. She knew where they lived.
yep.
And, if you had one you didn't know right away, yeah, that's also
Yep.
they lived there.
Yeah, I mean, admittedly, there were only 4 routes in the box section, but man, could she pitch mail. That was,
They quit canceling the mail in Verona, they sent it all to Madison, that's when Catherine quit.
yep. So that was just a personal thing. It was just too bad that did happen. But at any rate, then gradually, I mean, for quite some years, I mean, there were some original Verona employees. I was actually the last one, the original Verona employee, if you want to, the last person who was here under the Verona post office to retire. And now, I mean, I don't think anyone lives in Verona. There's the manager that's kind of like a rotating door. I don't think they have any special sense of community or anything else.
Basically a stepping stone, mostly.
Yeah, right.
Ken, you might mention that your uncle owns a mailbox.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna mention that.
When
Yep.
they delivered with horse and buggy.
Yep, I was gonna mention that when, I strayed from my notes here a little bit. Yes, when the rural routes were established in the very early 1900s, now, who knows what they used in Verona, I'm not sure. Some of you will remember Gerald O'Brien. He used to come into the post office here occasionally. His uncle, I believe it was, Jerome Sinan, do you remember that name? He was a rural carrier. And he told some of the stories of, I can't remember the particulars, of delivering in winter. I think he delivered that route that goes all the way up to Old Sauk Road. Oh, by the way, I found in the file, and I have it somewhere, I don't know where it is, in my house, a 1905 map of the rural routes. It's kind of a negative, it's like a blueprint on blue paper, and it shows, it identifies like farms where they turn, you know, here, there, and maybe it identifies all the farms, I don't remember. Anyway, we do have a 1905 map of the rural routes. But at any rate, yeah, my Uncle Harvey Zing has a mail delivery, I don't have a picture of it with me, mail delivery wagon from that era. And that came about in 1997, when Verona had the 150th celebration. And I seem to have remembered that in 1972, somehow, somewhere, there was one of these old rural delivery vehicles in the parade, and Boyd Gens was in. And I tried to trace down where they came from, but I think everybody had died or moved on and nobody knew anything about it. Somehow, somewhere, I traced down that there was one of these for sale. And Harvey bought this. He still owns it. We went up near Appleton to get it. We don't know where it was.
Where it was used.
Where it was used. But it's, yeah, it's a wood, I mean, it's, you know, from like 1900 era. He actually, the National Rural Carriers Union had their convention in Madison, well, I don't know, gosh, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, at the Monona Terrace Center. He actually rented it out to them. They had it on display for their national convention. So, unfortunately, most of the paint, it was milk paint, and the guy who had it, the antique collector, said when they were hauling it, it started raining. Didn't have a cover to wash a lot of the paint off it. I think I remember it says RFD 1 on it, I think, and probably US mail, you could see enough of that on there. So I'm glad you mentioned, I was going to mention that he does have, and they're very, very, when I was, I used to get the Rural Carrier Union magazine to see what was going on, and when, there was an article in there one time, there are very, very few of those in the United States, like just a handful, so it has some value. All right, let's see, where was I? What have I forgotten? Oh, we talked about, because there was kind of a Matz dynasty, but then talk about small town post office. So Bill Matz was a rural carrier. His dad had been a postmaster. His cousin Boyd Gens was the postmaster. Well, then Bill Matz was a widower, and Catherine was a widow. They ended up marrying, so we had husband and wife. And then Ken Zing, his sub, was his cousin Doris Lingard Waldman. And then I'm distantly related. My mother is the second cousin of both Doris and Ken Zing. I mean, I'm kind of out on the limb here, but a lot of people were related. So that was kind of the small town era of the Verona post office.
But the Flicks related to the Matzes too, and he was the original.
Oh, it could be.
I think there's a relationship.
With the original postmasters. That's why I kind of talked about the Al Matz. Do you know? You remember Al Matz? He actually was a Yep, he was ended up being, he was a supervisor at the main office, and I always teased him, you know, he was actually probably the rightful, you know, pretender to the throne of the Verona post office. Anyway, I see him, he's over at True Coffee occasionally, if you ever stop in there. All right, let's see what else we got going here. So there are now, I stopped in today to ask the manager, there's 16 routes here. In the old days there were 4, there's 16 routes. I asked him how many deliveries he had. Well, I know full well, all he had to do was go, he'd have a printout. He probably should know that. He just gave me some crazy answer off the top of his head. I don't think he really cared. So I don't really know. But you obviously know the growth in Verona, and then the Hawks Landing, forgot to mention Hawks Landing, that's all Verona addresses. Even though it's in the city of Madison, that's the crazy thing. When I was a manager here, I tried to get rid of that. I don't think it's been a problem, but I thought, oh, this is gonna be a real issue. These people are in the city of Madison, they're gonna have Verona addresses. But 2 different postmasters in Madison said, nope, forget it. We want to keep it in the Verona zip code. And I guess maybe there was no issue. So I just thought it was kind of crazy to have those mixed up municipal and zip code lines. But
Fitchburg got the same issue.
yeah, Fitchburg has no post office. Now, yeah, they have, oh my gosh, how many different zip codes?
I don't know, they have Madison, Oregon.
And Verona. Verona has maybe 60 deliveries or so. But they're authorized now, it started maybe 15 years ago. Fitchburg can use Fitchburg, Wisconsin as an official address with their zip code, as can Monona, Wisconsin 53716. There was a time it had to be Madison, or Fitchburg, it had to be addressed to Madison, Oregon, or Verona, but Fitchburg, Wisconsin is a legitimate post office name with the appropriate zip code, be it from Oregon, Verona, or Madison. So, yeah, of course, when we were there in the 60s, everything was obviously totally manual, and nowadays everything became more mechanized to the point of guessing, oh my gosh, 15 years ago or more, letter mail started to be sorted in the Madison post office in delivery orders. So, I've been far away from it for 11 years, but I would assume that virtually every piece of letter mail, and that was true when I retired, almost every piece of letter mail comes already sorted in delivery order to the routes. And the larger pieces of what we call flats, big envelopes, newspapers, that type of thing, when I retired, they were coming sorted to the routes. I don't know if they've ever gone to the point of being a delivery order, but it's certainly long ways from the old manual days. However, I don't know. Our mail deliveries later, and I don't care, but it seems to vary a lot. I've heard it from a lot of people. Mail deliveries become very erratic. And as far as I know, the outgoing mail now goes to Milwaukee for processing. And I can't help but delay mails. I think, the mail service is, I think, really deteriorating. Maybe I'm just a old grumpy retiree, I don't know, but I think it is true that they are. Oh, yes.
Yeah, I think that's part of their closing of the market.
Yeah, well.
I heard at one point that Epic was pushing to have like a branch of the phone office.
At their facility?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Growing the way they are. And that was 2 years ago.
When they say closing of the office, I think what the news media sometimes doesn't explain things the way they really are. But I think really what happened was they shut down the outgoing processing operation. As far as I know, the incoming, the sortation to the routes is still done in Madison, as far as I know. It comes, in other words, goes to Milwaukee, and that is distributed from there to Green Bay, Madison, all the various places, and then in Madison, it comes back to Madison for sorting to the routes. I believe that's the case, but I'm not
And
positive.
then in the southern part, the mail for New Glarus is delivered to Belleville, and whoever's in charge of the post office in New Glarus has to go to Belleville to get the mail.
Yep, there've been a lot of changes
Some
and
of the small communities.
a lot of that had all changed, you know, after I was gone, but for efficiency purposes, a lot of rural carriers no longer come out of the post office in the town where they deliver. New Glarus, for example, those are in Belleville. McFarland they're in Madison, it's all over the place. And part of the reason there was, or maybe all the reason was, to then get it down to just a retail window and post office box section, and then that would reduce the salary level of the postmaster, you know, some cost savings. And I'm not sure beyond that. I'm not positive of this. In fact, I always wondered why they didn't have like an area postmaster, you know, in charge of some of the smaller offices. I don't know if that's going on or not. I'm getting into deep water because I don't know what's going on currently.
You mentioned, Ken, that Verona is a branch of the...
Administratively a branch.
That must explain the fact that I had to go to Mount Horton to get a renewal of my passport.
Well, not.
Or go to Madison.
Yeah, I think they just have it, you know, spread out. I think that's what it is. I don't know that has anything to do with.
But did you get passports in Verona?
No. I think maybe it just geographically spread out. I think so. Does not. Does. Yeah, originally it was just at the main post office. Then the State Department pays the post office a fee for handling those. And then gradually they added other sites. I didn't know, for example, Mount Horn did it. I think they added that. I think it was a big innovation when they started at the main post
I thought
office.
it was kind of funny how they were Mount Horton.
Yeah, I think maybe they just pick strategic offices that, you know, not everyone. Oregon also. So who knows who to say. Anyway, in the old days, you could mail a letter up till 8 o'clock. We'd go out, addressed to Verona, it'd be delivered the same day. So, you know, things progress, but sometimes they regress. So what have I forgotten, Art? I think we kind of, with help from the studio audience, I think we kind of filled in the little bit of the history here. Oh yeah. I rescued in the furnace room of the old post office. There were 2 of these rural carrier satchels, and for the parade in 1997, I took them to a shoe repair place where they did leather work, got them cleaned up. This one's stamped 1937 on the inside. The other one isn't stamped, but at any rate, this is what the rural carriers used to use. Giant leather satchel. Almost forgot. Yeah, I know. So anyway, I took custody of them because I thought, you know what, they'll be thrown away. So someday, whenever there's a historical society depository, you know, that's a good place for it. I was going to mention one other thing. Oh, yeah, that parade in 1997. I don't know if you remember. What we did is we had Rick Ryan, who was one of the city carriers. His wife was a horse enthusiast, so we had horses. And I think we mentioned, you know, first horse, you know, delivery by horse to, you know, whatever year. Then we had Harvey's mail wagon mounted on a trailer. That is the first rural delivery with the horse-drawn wagon. Then we had Mercy Zerbachen's 1952 Buick, I believe. And we had rural carrier Chuck Whitley. I don't know if any of you had him as a mail. He was an older carrier. So Chuck Whitley was driving, I think it was the 1952 black Buick, you know, kind of the next step in rural delivery, driving cars. Then we had a Jeep for the those are the first city delivery vehicles, at least in Verona. Madison, I remember when I was a kid, they had some kind of scooter things or something.
Little three-wheel.
Yeah, three-wheel
People
things.
got killed on it because that front wheel get caught
Yeah.
on the other railroad track, they catch fire.
And then we had, well, called LLVs, long life vehicles, which I've heard the Postal Service is starting to think about replacing. Some of those vehicles are going to be, boy, I don't know, they were from the 80s, I know. Anyway, we had this succession of vehicles, so never to be recreated again, right? In the parade.
Used to use Rambler ambassadors,
They did, yes, Rambler ambassadors.
and then they had Pintos for a while.
Yeah, when I was after we became part of the Madison Post Office, occasionally I'd have to go into Madison on this date's the service, on Sundays, and we had mail collections on Sunday. They had outgoing mail and delivered special delivery mail. Special delivery mail. You get some foreign special deliveries, but there was a lot of special delivery mail. So it was kind of fun. Got to run around the city with a Rambler ambassador delivering special deliveries.
Just one other thing, Ken, in 1948, when we had the Centennial Parade, the Centennial Observation, Stanley Gordon was one of the rural mail
Yep.
carriers, and he was a frequent customer at the Eagles Nest, by the way.
Yep. You know, and it may not have been officials. It might have been the Eagle's Nest where he stopped. I may have misidentified.
I think so.
I was thinking South Main, but I think it's Eagle's
I think
Nest.
it was Eagles.
I stand corrected on that. Thank
But
you.
anyway, you know, airmail was kind of new in
Yeah.
1948.
Sure.
And I had made a very nice big model airplane. And Stanley saw that airplane and thought that it would work well if we mounted it on his car so he could drive it in the parade. And so we did that. It was an orange Piper Cub with a wingspan of about that
Wow.
long. And you know, it was made of balsa
Balsa
wood
wood.
and paper. And Stanley, I think had been at the Eagles Nest a little bit too long
Yeah.
before the parade. But at any rate, he drove it in the parade and he advertised airmail.
Yeah.
That was the big theme. And driving around Verona through the parade and Marietta Street and some of the other streets, which had a lot of trees, by the way. By the time he came back to the Eagles Nest, the airplane was nothing but just
Chef.
But he did make his point, I guess. Down Main Street, it was still in pretty
Yeah.
good shape.
Thanks for that story. And I was thinking South Main, but Eagles Nest, Stanley Gordon. I make that association. That is correct.
I would
Yes.
say he was very-
Stanley must put in some long days, because there was a bar, it was Grace Titus now. There was a bar there first, and he was just stopping there every noon.
Where is that?
Corner of,
Country Inn.
PB.
Oh, yes, yes.
Country Inn.
Yes.
Yeah. Every noon he'd stop there, he must have had a long.
Probably, yes.
I can tell
Yes.
Stanley Gordon's story. Stanley would come to the post office
Yes.
every morning after he retired.
Yes.
He'd come down early in the morning, take a state journal off of one of the rural carrier stacks.
Reading somebody
Then
else's
he'd go
paper.
sit on Boyd's chair at his desk,
Yep.
and a lot of times he'd walk in the snow, and there'd be a big puddle of water on
Nice.
Boyd's desk when Boyd came to work.
I do remember
Stanley
that.
had been there.
I do remember that. Boyd, I remember him grumbling one, Gordon's been here. And sometimes he'd forget his mail. He would, he'd come and get the mail, he'd read somebody's paper, and then he'd leave and forget it. Leaving his car running out in the winter, he'd leave it running out on the Verona Avenue. Oh, go, I'm sorry. Yep, there, pretty.
I have a question about your city mail carriers. When you started out in the beginning, how many pounds of mail were you carrying on your shoulder around the house?
35 pounds was the maximum. So you'd start out with 35 pounds and half-hour later, it was 10 or 15, so.
When it got heavy, it was like, let's say, blizzards, or somebody had those, they used to have those full coverages.
Well, when I first started, we used to have these full-size magazines like Life and Look, and it seemed like everybody on the route got those.
Yeah, yeah,
Those were, the Reader's Digest, yeah, because
yeah, they were bad ones. Phil?
I have a recollection of Stanley.
Roll Stanley
I
Gordon.
went to Valley View, and during the Second World War, we had these defense stands. Every week, one day a week, you bring your pennies and nickels and dimes, and I think it took $18 to fill one of the books stands. And then you could convert that to a bond, $18 bond. And so Stanley'd stop every week on stamp day, and I can see him yet standing up at the teacher's desk, counting all those pennies and nickels and a few dimes. And he was never in a good mood.
Ken,
Yeah.
I can remember when I was quite young in Verona, when George McKee, the mail would come in
Oh,
on the train.
okay.
And then
Yes.
George McKee would go up and get all these bags of mail and bring it down to the post office.
In fact, I had thought of that
in wheelbarrow.
you had told me years ago, and I couldn't remember who it was, and I was gonna ask you. Yep, that was his job, right? I mean, I don't, he just,
Every
yep,
morning to
his
go up there.
mail
When the train
came in by train. Yep,
they
all-
got these big bags of mail.
George McKee, okay, I remember him. I couldn't remember who it was. Oh, one quick other random note that, I don't know how many of you remember the highway post office that went through Verona for a while as a big bus. That went, I believe, from Madison to Dubuque. I mean, the old days were the railroad post office. Frank Brott, for those of you who remember him, he was on the railroad post office. I think he worked like Chicago to Minneapolis, I think, quite a bit, and maybe, you know, other lines. But eventually, as those were phased out, then they, you know, ended up employed at different places, and Frank ended up in the Verona post office. But also, as a kid, I remember it went through in the evening. I remember seeing the lights on this big bus, and the guys, you know, a couple guys were inside sorting mail.
Going down the road.
Yep, there were, when I was in the Madison post office, there were a couple guys at least who, they called them the HIPO, HPO, Highway Post Office. It was one that went from, I think, Madison to Hurley. I think one of the guys worked that. And so I don't think those operated for too long, but yeah, I wouldn't think. But somewhere I saw an article, and it may have been when I was fiddling around with this history book, and I hope they're still there, but that the old, well, former, not the oldest, but the former Verona Library at East Harriet and North Main, there were books of Alice Kunstman's articles. She was a correspondent. I believe she was Capital Times, I believe. I think Marion Sweet was State Journal, I think. But anyway, I don't know if all of Alice Kunstman's articles were clipped. I don't know if she did it, but it was a scrapbook of articles. I think I saw, there was an article, I think that's where it was, they had a big deal about the highway post office stopping in Verona, the inaugural run of this highway post office back, I suppose, in the 50s sometimes. Another random thought, so maybe I better quit before I have other random thoughts, I don't know. But thanks for the additional stories and
One nice
tips.
thing about the post office, Boyd liked to go golfing and stuff. Jay Henderson or Harlan Brooks, stop in and he'd call up Sylvia Kemper. She'd kind of fill in when Catherine took time off and stuff. He'd call up Sylvia and in half an hour she'd go over there. And once in a while when she wasn't working, she'd make a grasshopper cake, chocolate. Excellent. Okay. Doris would bring in raspberry pies, fresh raspberries, so, and cookies and stuff, so it was a pretty nice place to be.
It was.
And then after Madison took over, it got to be a little bit different.
Right.
It was a job.
There was,
You should tell the Rick Featherston story.
oh, God. This is, this is bizarre. I had an ingrown toenail. I had to have surgery. I couldn't walk. I think Boyd wouldn't pay anybody overtime. It's the dumbest thing. And it was kind of on my own. I think that's what happened. But they had a moratorium on overtime, but I had to have the surgery done. I had this infection. And I don't know if he volunteered or I hired Rick Featherston to just go out and deliver the mail route. He probably remembers that. Yeah.
He does remember that.
Yes, I'd long forgotten it.
Totally wrong.
Oh, it's crazy. It's crazy. It's the dumbest thing ever. Yeah. But I think Boyd wouldn't pay overtime. I couldn't do it. I was but anyway, Rick Featherston did deliver a route. So. And we have some private stories of Christmas time, the furnace room at Christmas time. We won't go into that. That's beyond the cakes. But those were the old days.